The prison hallways belonged to the predators. Everyone knew it. Inmates, guards. Even the concrete seemed like it had learned to stay quiet. So when the new janitor showed up, no one gave him a second glance. Faded blue uniform, rubber gloves, pushing a cart that rattled with every step. He was older than most, softer around the middle. The kind of man people assume will flinch before you even raise your hand. That's why they chose him. A boot shot out, toppling his bucket. Murky water spread across the tiles. "Hey, mop boy," one of them laughed. "You missed a spot." Another stepped closer, jabbing a finger into his chest. "You move slow, or you just brain dead." The janitor didn't answer. He crouched down and began wringing out the mop. Slowly, like he didn't hear them, like he didn't feel the circle closing around him. The laughter grew louder. Then one of them shoved him from behind. The janitor stopped moving. He stood up, not rushed, not angry, just aligned. A guard at the end of the corridor squinted. Something about that posture felt wrong. Too balanced, too grounded. The bully rolled his shoulders. "What are you going to do? Scrub me to death?" The janitor finally spoke. His voice was calm, flat, almost gentle. "Please don't make me do this at work." The bullies laughed. They didn't see the way his hands rose. Not clenched, not trembling, but loose, ready. They didn't hear the shift in the room. The way sound itself seemed to retreat. Because that wasn't the stance of a janitor. It was the stance of a man who had stood in rings under spotlights with blood on the canvas and learned exactly how long it takes to end a fight. And in the next few seconds, everyone in that hallway was about to learn it too. Stay with me until the end, because what this janitor does next inside that prison will make even the warden question who really runs that place. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The man pushing that rattling cart through the corridors of Stonebridge State Penitentiary went by Marcus Webb. Just Marcus to the inmates who bothered acknowledging him at all. To the guards, he was badge number 623. To the administration, he was a line item, part of their inmate work program that looked impressive on annual reviews. But 15 years ago, Marcus Webb had been something else entirely, something the boxing world called the Hurricane, a welterweight destroyer who could end fights with combinations so fast they looked rehearsed. 41 professional victories, 31 knockouts, a right hook that sports analysts described as calculated violence wrapped in velvet. The fall had been swift and merciless, not in the ring, but outside it. Bad business partners, worse attorneys. A prescription pill dependency that started as pain management and ended as chains. The final blow came when his manager vanished with what remained of his earnings, leaving Marcus with creditors, tax liens, and a heroin habit that had started as escape and ended as prison. The judge had been surprisingly merciful. 6 years for fraud and possession. Could have been worse. Should have been worse, Marcus knew. But his defense team had played up the tragic champion angle, and the public sympathy had worked in his favor. Now, 4 years into his sentence, Marcus had found something resembling peace in the monotony of mopping corridors and emptying trash cans. The work was honest, simple. Nobody expected anything from him except clean floors and scrub sinks. After a lifetime of people demanding he destroy other human beings for entertainment, there was strange comfort in making things cleaner instead of bloodier. The other inmates barely registered his existence. Marcus preferred it that way. He learned early that reputation in prison was a double-edged sword. Too weak and you became prey. Too strong and you became a target for every ambitious thug looking to build a name. Invisible was perfect. Invisible was safe. But invisible only worked if everyone agreed to pretend you weren't there. And on this particular Thursday morning, as Marcus pushed his cart down D-Wing's main corridor, someone had decided the game was over. The 3 men who blocked his path were exactly what Hollywood would cast for stock prison intimidators. Tyrone Briggs, the obvious leader, stood 6'3" with arms like steel cables and a face tattoo that spelled out "Ruthless" in jagged letters. His right hand, a twitchy man called Spider, shifted his weight constantly like he'd swallowed lightning for breakfast. The third member, Bull, was built like a concrete wall and had the emotional depth of one. They ruled D-Wing through a combination of brutality and intimidation that the guards silently permitted because it maintained order. Better to have controlled wolves than chaos. Tyrone's crew controlled the gambling, the smuggled phones, and the protection racket that kept smaller inmates safe for a weekly fee paid in commissary goods or services. Marcus had managed to avoid their attention for 4 years by being exactly what he appeared to be, a worn-down, middle-aged man cleaning floors for 52 cents an hour. No money worth stealing, no pride worth crushing, no threat worth eliminating until today, apparently. "Well, look who we got here," Tyrone announced, his voice carrying that particular mixture of mockery and threat that bullies master in middle school and never outgrow. "The ghost himself." Marcus continued wringing out his mop, water dripping steadily into the gray bucket. He'd learned that engaging bullies early only encouraged them. Sometimes they'd lose interest and drift away if you offered nothing entertaining to work with. "I'm talking to you, scrub." Tyrone's tone hardened. "You've been working this wing for what, 3 years now? Never once paid respects to the men who run things around here." Spider snickered, a sound like crackling static. "Maybe he thinks he's above us, Ty. Maybe he thinks his bucket makes him important." Marcus kept his eyes on the floor, methodically swirling the mop in careful circles. The soapy water created small spirals that reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. A memory from before this place, before the collapse, before everything shattered. "That's disrespect," Bull added, his voice a deep rumble. "Serious disrespect." The truth was simpler than they imagined. Marcus didn't talk to them because he'd spent enough time around dangerous men to recognize the species. Tyrone wasn't truly dangerous, not in the way that mattered. He was dangerous the way a cornered animal was dangerous. Unpredictable, savage, but ultimately limited by his own impulses. Real danger was controlled, calculated, patient. Marcus had fought real danger. He'd shared rings with men who could end your career with a single perfectly placed uppercut. Men who analyzed you for 12 rounds, cataloging your habits, your flaws, your timing before striking with surgical precision. Tyrone Briggs threw fits and called it power. But explaining that would require talking, and talking would require acknowledging their existence. And acknowledging their existence would disrupt the delicate balance that had kept Marcus alive and unnoticed for 4 years. So he kept mopping. That's when Tyrone's foot shot out, catching the edge of the bucket and sending grimy water cascading across the freshly cleaned floor. The sound echoed down the corridor like a small flood, and Marcus watched his morning's work spread in a murky wave toward the cell doors. "Whoops," Tyrone said, grinning wide enough to show 2 gold caps. "Looks like you got more work to do." Marcus straightened slowly, his hand still gripping the mop handle. For just a moment, muscle memory flickered through his nervous system. The way his shoulders should set, how his feet should position, the angle that would give him maximum leverage for a left cross that could travel from his back foot, through his hip, up his spine, and into Tyrone's jaw with enough force to shatter bone. Instead, he knelt down and began soaking up the spilled water with his mop. One stroke at a time, methodical, peaceful. "You hearing me, old-timer?" Tyrone stepped closer, his shadow falling across Marcus's work. "I asked you a question." Marcus squeezed water from the mop and dipped it again. The repetitive motion was almost hypnotic. Dip, squeeze, wipe, repeat. Simple tasks for a simple life. "Maybe he's deaf," Spider suggested, shifting his weight restlessly. "Or maybe he's just dumb." "You dumb janitor man?" That's when Bull decided to escalate things. His massive hand shot out and shoved Marcus hard between the shoulder blades, sending him stumbling forward. The mop handle clattered against the concrete as Marcus caught himself with his palms against the wet floor. And something shifted in that corridor. Something subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm breaks. When the atmosphere itself seems to pause. Marcus rose to his feet, and for the first time in 4 years, he wasn't invisible anymore. When Marcus straightened up from that shove, the change was immediate. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just a subtle shift in the way he carried himself that made the air in the corridor feel heavier. Tyrone noticed it first, the way the older man's shoulders settled, how his breathing remained perfectly controlled despite being surrounded. Most inmates would be trembling by now, stammering apologies or puffing up their chests in desperate bravado. Marcus didn't either. You got something to say now? Tyrone pressed, stepping into Marcus's personal space, close enough that Marcus could smell the stale tobacco on his breath, see the small nick above his right eye from some forgotten brawl. Marcus's response was barely above a whisper. I said, please don't make me do this at work. Spider let out another one of his static laughs. Do what, old-timer? Mop the floor? That's what they pay you for. But Bull had gone silent. Something in his primitive awareness was picking up signals that his more aggressive companions were missing. The way Marcus stood wasn't the posture of a victim. It was the stance of someone who had measured the distance between himself and each potential threat, calculated angles and timing, and found the mathematics acceptable. You threatening us? Tyrone's voice rose, drawing attention from inmates in nearby cells. Faces appeared at the small windows, sensing entertainment about to unfold. You think because you push a mop around here, you're somebody? Marcus's hands hung loose at his sides. No fists, no tension, just ready. I think I'd like to finish my shift without any problems. Your shift? Tyrone laughed, but the sound carried less confidence than before. Your shift is whatever we say it is, Janitor. You answer to us now. That's when Marcus made his first mistake in 4 years. He looked Tyrone directly in the eyes. The bullies had been expecting fear. They'd been counting on submission. What they saw instead was something far more unsettling. Marcus's gaze held the kind of calm that comes from having survived much worse than anything Tyrone Briggs could imagine. It was the look of a man who had faced opponents who could actually hurt him, really hurt him, and had walked away victorious more often than not. Yo, Ty, Bull rumbled, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. Maybe we should... Should what? Tyrone snapped, his authority challenged in front of an audience. Back down from some washed-up janitor? You going soft, Bull? But Bull had fought enough real fights to recognize something his leader was missing. The way Marcus distributed his weight, the slight angle of his feet, the distance he maintained between himself and each of them. This wasn't a man preparing to be a victim. This was a man preparing to work. Marcus tried one more time. Look, I just want to clean these floors and go back to my cell. No trouble, no issues. Just let me do my job. Your job, Spider said, shifting more aggressively now, is whatever we tell you it is. Right now, your job is showing us some respect. How much respect you want? Marcus asked quietly. The question caught Tyrone off guard. He'd expected begging or defiance, not negotiation. What? You want me to say I'm sorry? I'll say I'm sorry. You want me to clean this up faster? I'll clean it up faster. You want commissary money? I got $23 in my account. You can have it. Tyrone's face flushed crimson. The offer of submission should have satisfied him, but something in Marcus's tone made it sound less like surrender and more like a business transaction, like a man offering to pay a toll to avoid a longer route. I don't want your money, old man. I want you to understand how things work around here. I understand, Marcus said. You run this wing. You make the rules. I'm just trying to clean floors and stay out of everyone's way. Then why are you standing there like you're ready to fight somebody? Marcus looked down at himself, as if genuinely surprised by the observation. I'm not ready to fight anybody. I'm too old for that nonsense. But his body language told a different story. The way he'd positioned himself gave him clear escape routes, while maintaining optimal striking distance. His hands remained relaxed but ready to move in any direction necessary. Most telling of all, he hadn't backed down an inch despite being outnumbered 3-1. You know what I think? Tyrone said, circling Marcus like a predator sizing up prey. I think you're trying to play us, acting all humble and scared, but really you think you're tough. I don't think I'm tough, Marcus replied honestly. I think I'm tired. And he was tired. Tired of the constant vigilance required to survive in a place like this. Tired of pretending to be less than he was. Tired of swallowing his pride every time someone decided to use him as entertainment. But mostly, he was tired of running from who he used to be. Well, you're about to be a lot more tired, Tyrone promised, cracking his knuckles with theatrical flair, because we're going to give you a real education. The first punch came exactly as Marcus expected it would. Telegraphed from Tyrone's shoulder, thrown with anger instead of technique, aimed at intimidation rather than maximum damage. In the old days, Marcus would have slipped it so cleanly that Tyrone would have stumbled past him into the wall. Instead, Marcus absorbed the blow on his forearm, letting the impact spin him slightly to the right. To the casual observer, it looked like Tyrone's punch had landed flush and staggered the older man. In reality, Marcus had redirected 90% of the force while positioning himself perfectly for what came next. "That's what you get for disrespecting us," Tyrone announced to his audience, flexing for the inmates watching from their cells. But Marcus wasn't staggered. He was measuring, the way Tyrone dropped his guard after throwing a punch. How Spider telegraphed his movements with that constant shifting. Where Bull positioned himself in relation to the others. Old habits were surfacing. The analytical mind that had studied opponents for 12 rounds, looking for patterns, weaknesses, opportunities. Tyrone threw punches like he was swinging at shadows. Spider moved like he was powered by nervous energy instead of controlled aggression. Bull was strong but slow, and he favored his left side because of an old injury that showed in the way he shifted his weight. "You done learned your lesson, Janitor?" Tyrone asked, shaking out his hand. The punch had hurt him more than he'd expected. Marcus's forearm had felt like hitting a cinder block. Marcus straightened his uniform shirt and reached for his mop. "Yes, sir. Lesson learned." But as he bent down to retrieve his cleaning supplies, Tyrone made his second mistake of the encounter. He interpreted Marcus's compliance as weakness rather than strategy. "Not so fast," Tyrone said, kicking the mop across the corridor. "We ain't finished with your education yet." That's when Marcus realized the performance was over. They weren't going to let him walk away with his dignity intact. They needed a complete victory, a total humiliation, something they could talk about for weeks to maintain their reputation. Marcus stood up slowly, and this time he didn't try to hide what he was. The mask of the humble janitor slipped away, replaced by something harder, something forged in gymnasiums and refined in rings where men fought for more than just dominance. "Please," he said one final time, "don't make me do this." Tyrone laughed, but the sound came out forced. Something had changed in Marcus's posture, and every instinct Tyrone had developed during his years in the system was suddenly screaming warnings. "Do what, old man? You going to scrub us to death?" Marcus's hands rose from his sides, not clenched into fists, not raised in surrender, just positioned where they could move fastest when the time came. "No," Marcus said quietly. "I'm going to show you why they used to call me Hurricane." Tyrone's confidence cracked the moment Marcus mentioned that name. Hurricane. Every boxing fan from the early 2010s knew that name. The welterweight who could end fights before his opponents knew they'd started. "You're full of it," Tyrone said, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "Hurricane Webb retired years ago." "Hurricane Webb went to prison," Marcus corrected quietly. "I'm just the janitor now." Spider stopped shifting. Bull took a half step backward. Even the inmates watching from their cells had gone silent, sensing something electric building in the corridor. Tyrone's pride wouldn't let him back down. Not with an audience. "I don't care if you're Floyd Mayweather's ghost. You're in my house now, and you're going to learn respect." He threw another punch, this one with more technique behind it. Marcus didn't block it or slip it. He simply wasn't there when it arrived. The movement was so fluid, it looked like Tyrone had punched through vapor. Marcus's response was surgical, a short right hook that traveled maybe 8 inches, catching Tyrone just below the ribs. The punch looked gentle, almost lazy, but Tyrone's eyes went wide as the air exploded from his lungs. He doubled over, gasping like a fish on concrete. "That's the liver," Marcus explained conversationally, as if he was teaching a seminar. "Hurts worse than getting hit in the face, but there's no permanent damage. You'll be fine in about 30 seconds. Spider rushed in from the side, swinging wild haymakers. Marcus stepped into the attack, his shoulder absorbing one punch while his forearm deflected another. His left hand found Spider's solar plexus with pinpoint accuracy. Spider collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest and making small, whimpering sounds. "Solar plexus," Marcus noted to Bull, who was still frozen in place. "Temporarily paralyzes the diaphragm. He can't breathe for a minute or two, but no lasting harm." Bull looked at his 2 fallen comrades, then at Marcus, then at the panic button 25 feet down the corridor. Marcus followed his gaze and shook his head slightly. Don't make this worse than it has to be, Marcus said. Help your friends. They'll recover. But Tyrone was already struggling to his feet, his face purple with rage and oxygen deprivation. You think you're smart, old man? You think this is over? Marcus picked up his mop and began cleaning the spilled water again. I think you should get those ribs looked at. That punch was harder than it needed to be. This ain't over, Tyrone wheezed, leaning heavily against the wall. You hear me? This ain't over. Yes, it is, Marcus said without looking up from his mopping. Because if it's not over, I'll have to stop holding back. The threat was delivered in the same conversational tone Marcus might use to discuss the weather. But something in his voice made Tyrone's blood run cold. The realization hit him that everything Marcus had just done was controlled, measured, professional. He was holding back? Bull asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus wrung out his mop and looked at the three men with something approaching pity. In the ring, I had to hurt people to win. That was the job. Here, I just want to clean floors and serve my time. But if you make this personal, if you force me to fight for real, someone's going to the infirmary. He resumed his cleaning, methodically working around their feet as if they were furniture. Tyrone watched him work, seeing something he'd missed before. The way Marcus moved wasn't just confident, it was economical. Every motion served a purpose. No wasted energy, no unnecessary movements. How many people you put down? Spider asked from his position on the floor. Never killed nobody, Marcus replied, but I put 19 men to sleep in the ring, and that was when I was following rules. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Tyrone's crew controlled D-Wing through intimidation and numbers, but intimidation only worked on people who could be intimidated, and numbers only mattered if you could use them effectively. Marcus finished cleaning around them and moved his cart further down the corridor. As he walked away, his voice carried back to them. Next time you see me coming, just nod and keep walking. That's all the respect I need. Word spread through Stone Ridge like wildfire. By evening count, every inmate knew the story. The quiet janitor who'd humiliated Tyrone's crew without breaking a sweat. Some details got exaggerated in the telling. Others got whispered with religious reverence. Marcus ate his dinner alone, same as always. But the cafeteria felt different. Conversation stopped when he passed. Eyes followed his movements. Some inmates nodded respectfully. Others gave him wide berth, unsure whether the legend was friendly or dangerous. Tyrone's crew sat at their usual table, but the swagger was gone. Tyrone picked at his food with his left hand, his right arm still tender from where Marcus's punch had rattled his ribcage. Spider stared at his tray without eating. Bull kept glancing toward Marcus's table with something approaching awe. We can't let this slide, Tyrone muttered. People are going to think we're weak. Maybe we are weak, Bull said quietly. Compared to him, anyway. Tyrone's face flushed. He caught us off guard. Next time will be different. But even as he said it, Tyrone knew there wouldn't be a next time. Not from him, not directly. The memory of that liver punch was too fresh. The casual way Marcus had dismantled them without even breathing hard. There's other ways, Tyrone said finally. Guards can be paid. Accidents can happen. Nobody's untouchable in here. Spider looked up from his untouched food. You really want to go to war with Hurricane Webb? I want to survive in here, Tyrone snapped. And I can't survive if every punk thinks they can disrespect me because some washed-up boxer got lucky. But Tyrone's words carried less fire than usual. Deep down, he understood what Bull and Spider had already figured out. Marcus hadn't gotten lucky. Marcus had been merciful, and mercy from someone that dangerous was more terrifying than anger from someone weak. 3 tables away, Marcus finished his mashed potatoes and wondered how long he had before Tyrone's wounded pride forced another confrontation. Prison politics were predictable. Tyrone couldn't afford to look weak, which meant he'd have to retaliate somehow. The only question was how and when. Marcus had hoped 4 years of invisibility would carry him through to his release date. 22 months left on his sentence if he kept his nose clean. But clean noses were a luxury for men who didn't accidentally remind people they used to be dangerous. As he carried his tray to the wash station, Marcus caught sight of himself in the metal reflection of a serving counter. For just a moment, he didn't see the middle-aged janitor with the blue uniform and tired eyes. He saw Hurricane Marcus Webb, The man who'd once made grown men afraid to enter a boxing ring. That man had been buried under 4 years of mopping floors and keeping his head down. But Tyrone's stupidity had cracked the grave open, and now Marcus wasn't sure he could put that ghost back to rest. The next morning brought new challenges. Marcus's usual routine of early cleaning was interrupted by whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Inmates who'd never spoken to him before nodded respectfully. Others crossed to the other side of corridors to avoid his path. But the most telling change was in the guards. Officer Reyes, who supervised the cleaning crew, looked at Marcus differently during the morning briefing, not with suspicion exactly, but with the kind of careful attention you'd give a coiled snake. "Webb," Reyes said after dismissing the other cleaners. "Word is you had some excitement yesterday." Marcus continued organizing his supplies. "Just doing my job, sir." "Your job is cleaning floors, not fighting inmates." "Yes, sir. That's why I tried to avoid it." Reyes studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of trouble. What he saw instead was the same tired compliance Marcus had shown for 4 years. But now Reyes knew it was a performance. The question was whether Marcus's act was protection for the other inmates or for himself. "Tyrone Briggs's crew filed a complaint," Reyes continued. "Says you assaulted them without provocation." Marcus looked up from his cart. "That what they say happened?" "That's what they wrote in their statement. Of course, funny thing about their story. Security cameras don't quite match their version of events." Marcus resumed his work. The cameras in D-Wing were old and positioned poorly, but they would have caught the basic sequence. Tyrone's crew surrounding him, the spilled bucket, the shoving, and Marcus defending himself with minimal force. "You want to tell me your side?" Reyes asked. "They knocked over my bucket. I cleaned it up. Sometimes accidents happen when people get too close to wet floors." The explanation was masterfully neutral. Marcus acknowledged the incident without admitting fault or casting blame. Just a workplace mishap between professionals. Reyes almost smiled. In 12 years of corrections work, he'd heard every excuse, threat, and sob story imaginable. Marcus's calm deflection was refreshingly honest in its dishonesty. "Well, try to keep your accidents to a minimum," Reyes said finally. "Prison's dangerous enough without slippery floors." "Yes, sir. Safety first." But as Marcus pushed his cart toward the morning's assignments, both men knew the real conversation had nothing to do with wet floors. Marcus had demonstrated that he could handle himself if pressed. Reyes had acknowledged that some demonstrations were more justified than others, and now they both understood the new rules of engagement. The morning passed quietly until Marcus reached the prison chapel. Father Mitchell, the elderly chaplain, looked up nervously as he entered with his cleaning supplies. "Morning, Father Mitchell," Marcus said, same as always. "Good morning, Marcus." He paused, clearly wanting to say more. Are you all right? I heard there was some trouble yesterday." Marcus began dusting the pews with methodical precision. "No trouble, Father. Just a misunderstanding. The other inmates, they're saying you used to be a professional fighter." Marcus's hand stilled on the wood for just a moment. "Used to be a lot of things, Father Mitchell. Now I'm just a janitor who likes peace and quiet." The chaplain watched him work, noting the careful way he moved around the furniture. Not clumsy or uncertain, but deliberate. Like a man who understood exactly how much space his body occupied and what it could do within that space. "Were you really Hurricane Marcus Webb?" he asked quietly. Marcus turned to face him, and for the first time in 4 years, he didn't deflect the question. "Long time ago. Different life. I remember seeing you fight on television. My nephew was a boxing fan. You were remarkable." The word hung in the air between them. Remarkable. Marcus couldn't remember the last time anyone had used that word to describe him. Certainly not since his arrest. Not since the fall from grace that had brought him to this place. "That was somebody else," Marcus said finally. "I'm just trying to serve my time and stay out of trouble." "But you can't, can you? Stay out of trouble, I mean. Not after yesterday." Marcus resumed his dusting. But Father Mitchell's words followed him around the chapel. He was right, of course. Prison ecosystems were delicate things. You could be invisible for years, but once you became visible, you stayed visible. And visible meant vulnerable. Tyrone's crew wouldn't forget what happened. More importantly, they couldn't afford to forget. Their reputation was built on the fear of consequences. If word spread that an old janitor had embarrassed them without repercussions, their authority would crumble, which meant Marcus had maybe days before they tried again. Next time with weapons, next time with allies, next time with the kind of planning that turned prison fights into prison funerals. Marcus finished the chapel and moved on to his next assignment, acutely aware that his 22 months to freedom had just become the longest 2 years of his life. Tyrone's face went white as Marcus's words sank in. Hurricane. Marcus Webb wasn't just a name anymore. It was a promise wrapped in a blue uniform, standing in a prison corridor with a mop in his hands and 22 months left to serve. The weeks that followed changed everything at Stonebridge. Marcus went back to his cleaning routine, but the prison had shifted around him. Inmates nodded when he passed. Guards watched with new respect, and Tyrone's crew learned to find other corridors when they saw that rattling cart approaching. Marcus never threw another punch. He didn't have to. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is remind people who you used to be. Because in a place where reputation is everything, being a legend beats being invisible every single time. The bullies had learned a lesson that would echo through those concrete walls long after Marcus walked free. Never judge a man by the uniform he wears or the mop he pushes, because you never know when you might be picking a fight with a hurricane itself. And sometimes, just sometimes, hurricanes strike twice in the same place. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Behind Bar Tales for more incredible prison stories. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought. Until next time.